We are here at the Music Writers Lab. We wanted to make sure that we were reconnecting with our past participants, our fam, make sure that everyone has, is still open to opportunities of collaborating, of networking, and continuing to learn from some incredible writers and editors who are out here doing their thing. And we are so lucky to be able to get some time and some gems from a writer who is out here doing her thing, but doing it in another market. And I'm really glad that I get to have a chat with her today and sort of bring her career and her experiences to you guys as well. This is Brittany Spanos from Rolling Stone US, senior writer. Who's killing it. When I heard that we were going to be potentially working together, I was just like, it's so good to finally put a face to the name. So over today's session, we're just me having a chat with Britt, finding out a bit more about her process and yeah, gaining more perspective of what it's like to be working in a bigger global market, sorry, in a bigger international market, a globally recognized name, but also potentially we'll find some common threads of experience. Before we get started today, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the lands of which I'm coming to you from. That is the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nations here in Naarm, also known as Melbourne. I'm so lucky that I get to live and create on lands that are still has still got such a strong connection to its Indigenous culture. And in my work, and I believe in in all of our works, regardless of what creative field we're in, we do need to acknowledge and respect that we are able to do so on lands that are still being tended and cared for by, you know, the people who were here a long time before us and will continue to be after us. So big respect to elders past and present, and for anyone who's joining us in our session today. We see you and we love you. So let's get into things today. Britt is joining us from New York. It is obviously a completely, in a lot of ways, it's a completely different scene to be working in as a music journalist over there. But I feel like, not to labor on about how bad COVID was or anything, but I do feel like during that period of time, it leveled everybody out. So, first of all, a big welcome, Brittany. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
for
your
having me.
time. And I thought maybe we could just get started in finding out a bit about what it's like for you working right now. Like, how have you found things have either picked back up for you during this time, or did it ever stop in New York? Like, what was the vibe over there over the last couple of years?
Um, I guess I've been working at Rolling Stone for 8 years now, so I've been very fortunate to have a full-time job, and I know that for different people in the industry in the U.S. especially, it's been pretty awful in media.
Yeah,
So I've been very fortunate to have sort of stable work in that way. So it never really slowed down in any way. I think the function of our jobs and reporting definitely changed in 2020. Our
yeah,
we became much more remote. Obviously, I didn't. I was traveling a lot in 2019 and 2018 prior to that for work, going to LA and other cities where artists are based or were
yeah.
kind of spending time. So I would spend time with them in these places. So everything became over Zoom or over the phone. And so that was probably the biggest change for me, was just having to kind of build more in-depth profiles with people that I wasn't spending face-to-face time with. But
Yeah.
other than that, it just sort of changed the function of what we were covering for the time being. Of course, it really became about the absence of the music industry, of what
Yeah.
it used to look like and how it was changing. So I think we all, no matter what our beat was, it became about the touring industry, the way artists were struggling, how it was being hit. I mean, we were hit with a wave of tragedy after tragedy that we all
Mm,
kind of had to chip in and find ways to cover, even if that wasn't necessarily what our beat was. but yeah, I started kind of getting back into the traveling bit of it even before things really reopened here, which was, a
Yeah.
fascinating kind of, difference in how a lot of that's structured and how I've done things before. And so November 2020 was like the first, like I traveled to LA for a story. Um, but I think it's definitely it feels kind of more like it did pre 2020 in the
Sure.
past, I would say, year.
Yeah, absolutely. I know over here it was, I mean, obviously, specifically here on the East Coast, we went into a pretty hard lockdown pretty quickly, and I feel like that definitely sort of left an imprint on the arts industry here that it took, I think, a lot longer than people realized for us to come
Yeah,
back from. There was just a lot of trauma there, but that is one thing I kind of agreed with. Like, it took maybe, at least for me, like I do feel very blessed and very lucky, but there was maybe a 6 month period where I was just like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep writing or, whatever, just in the absence of all of these things. But then once
yeah,
people started to realize that, okay, we've still got the platform to write, but our perspectives can kind of shift. So even though it
mhm,
might not be like the in-depth profile pieces or the in-depth reviews that we might be used to doing, it's just that we still have a platform to write about how bad, well, to write about how bad things are, but also use it in a really constructive way to like spend our time going in and being like, here's the realities of our situation. Like, let's actually use our platform to get those messages out.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think everyone just kind of had to reconfigure how to
totally.
cover what we were used to covering and the way it was
Yeah,
changing, and had to think ahead in ways that, like, we could even tell what our lives would look like in a year, let alone what touring would look like in a year, or
yeah,
what releasing albums and recording music would look like in a year. So it was very fascinating to kind of be put in that position where you're kind of like, I don't know what's going to
yeah,
happen in like 6 months. Like, am I going to be back in the office in 6 months? Am I
yeah,
going to be able to travel? Am I going to be able to be in a room with my friends in 6 months, let alone,
yeah,
like, is this artist going to be able to tour, or especially smaller artists who that's their entire livelihood. And that is,
yeah,
they need to tour to make money. Like, that's, it's just like trying to figure out ways to support a lot of artists being put in a really awful position.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, we're gonna, I guess we might probably come back to this down the line, but I want to take it all the way back for a brief moment. Where does one start on this journey? Like, where did it start for you? Were you always interested in writing? Did you grow up in a kind of musical environment that led you there? Like, where did a love for seeing music in the way that you do, where did that start
Yeah.
for you?
Before I knew I wanted to be a music journalist, both music as a fan and
Mm,
um, writing as a kind of a very voracious reader as a kid were really important to me. And I grew up in a family that had a lot of people who were super fans of stuff. So my mom was like a Michael Jackson, Prince, and then later Alanis
awesome.
Morissette super fan. My grandpa was like a huge Elvis stan, like obsessed with Elvis. My grandma loved like Motown girl groups, and my dad was a huge metalhead, like would only be wearing like
Awesome.
Metallica shirts all the time. So I grew up with people who had like very specific taste in music and very
Mm,
specific um, and intense enjoyment of that music. And I myself, as a kid, became really obsessed with like boy bands, and
yeah.
I loved NSYNC, and I was a huge NSYNC fan, and I still am, but like, like I was
Yeah.
just like really obsessed and had like all
Uh-huh.
the merch and everything. So that was always a really important part of my life. I always dreamed of being a writer when I was really young. I loved to read. No matter what sort of like wacky new, if I wanted to be like an astronaut one week, I still wanted to be like an astronaut and an author. Like, that was like
Yeah.
a big part of the way that I was. Honestly, like I just, like, when I was in middle school, I started to become more interested in learning more about the artist. It was kind of the progression of being like a super Justin Timberlake fan, where I need to know like
Yeah.
the things that he loved and hated, where it was like, oh, like I love Green Day. I can read books on Green Day and learn more about them.
Hmm.
And I remember I got really into Led Zeppelin, And I read Hammer of the Gods when I was way too young to be reading Hammer of the Gods. And then I was like, there's a movie that's kind of based, like loosely based off of some of the scenes in Hammer of the Gods kind of made their way into Almost Famous. I watched Almost Famous, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I could make a job out of doing this.
I feel like
So
that was a
I was like,
kickoff point for a lot of us, right?
yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah, I
oh,
was
I
like
can do that.
12 around that time, and
Yeah.
I knew that I was like, oh, this just like this makes the most sense. Like this is the only thing that
Yeah.
feels right for me to do. So yeah, I mean that's really what started. I was very one track mind with it. I read about music for like school papers and newsletters in middle school and high school. I went to NYU for college and studied a kind of make your own major for music journalism and pop culture journalism. And that was, it's the only thing I am trained in. So it's the only thing I know how to do. So yeah, I ended up interning at the Village Voice here in college and being full time there for a little bit after college, and then was freelancing for Rolling Stone also right after college, and ended up getting a full time job as a sort of online editorial assistant in 2015, about like 6 months after I graduated.
And then it sort of, do you remember when it became more of, I guess, do you remember the moment where it became the job that you're doing now? Like when you moved into that sort of senior writing position, did it feel like anything
Yeah.
shifted, or did it feel like it was just more of an organic sort of step up?
Yeah. So I moved to staff writer, that the job that I had when I started in like it was like January 2015, it was like very entry level. But I've been freelancing for them, and I was writing, and that job was like it's very easy. So I was like I would kind of finish all the tasks for that. I'd be writing a lot and was slowly writing more, moved to staff writer within like I think like 8 or 9 months after that I moved to staff writer. And then yeah, over the next like few years I was just pitching and working on bigger and bigger pieces, and
Awesome.
figuring out what kind of writer I wanted to be. I think I was 22 when I started. I had this mix of I really wanted to do cover stories and write profiles and things like that, but I also like criticism, and I like doing sort of the kind of in-depth researchy pieces that are kind of fun to chase. And but I ended up just being really, I love interviewing artists, and I think it boils down to that for most of the pieces that I love doing. I love talking to people, I love sitting down with them, and started pitching more profiles, working on bigger stories, and yeah, then eventually by like 2018, I think it was when I was promoted to senior writer. Yeah, I think it was like late 2018 I was promoted to senior writer. So
awesome.
Yeah, and it was a lot of advocating for myself, and
yeah, you
really,
gotta.
I was pretty young then, so I think they had a lot of. They're kind of like, maybe you're too young, and I was like, I don't know, I've written like 3 cover stories already, so I don't know if it counts anymore.
I don't know.
I don't think we need to eat that.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a, again, speaking of common threads, like that is such a thing, and I feel like a lot of a lot of our participants in this music writers lab will have felt that at some point. It's like when you've got the passion there and you know that you've proven your talent, there's still those just whack like logistical like perspective hurdles to get over. Like you could be freelancing and grinding for however many years, like actually getting your chops up in a way that not many other people who just like come into these jobs quickly would do. But it's like, oh, you might be too young, or you know you haven't been in the scene long or whatever, because there's a lot of writers who started during COVID who haven't really been able to travel heaps with it, or they haven't had the same sort of entry pathway as like you and I may have had. But still, it's just like check the resume though, like check the check the portfolio, here are all the stories I've done, like I'm good. Like I'm good. That's so funny. um Okay, so you work your way up after college, you're interning, you land at Rolling Stone. Obviously, Rolling Stone is such a recognizable name. I feel like it's one of those magazines, like even if you're not well across the content, it's like you know what the title looks like, the font, like, a bit of the history behind it. For you, I guess in the US, when you first started, did Rolling Stone still have that like the cultural cachet behind it? Because I know things have obviously changed with things going online. There's been, I know over here anyway, there was a period of time where there was like less emphasis on like the importance of print magazines and stuff like that. But I just wanted to get a little bit of an idea of what the landscape was like for print journalism in particular and working for such a recognizable brand when you first started.
Yeah, I mean, so around the time that I was entering the field, it was kind of a fascinating dichotomy of like there was all of these, it was a very saturated moment. Like there was a large
Mm.
number of places to write. You wouldn't be always paid well at all of them, but there was
Yeah.
a large number. There's a lot of blogs, a lot of independent magazines, alt weeklies, of course, like Village Voice and things like that. There was local places, there was a lot of places you could write, and a huge, huge digital media market that you can enter, especially as a culture writer. And all of the print magazines, however, especially the legacy print magazines, were having sort of a slower time catching up to digital media. I think this was like kind of peak BuzzFeed era. This was, BuzzFeed like lists getting, millions of views and things like that, where it's like you're competing with that kind of content. And there was when I joined, it was just like their digital face of Rolling Stone was non-existent really. They didn't have a lot of the cover stories up online. They weren't even putting a lot of the print content online at that point. And I was kind of on a newly found team that was refocusing and shifting everything to digital. So like as an online producer, like a big part of my job at that time, when I first started, was to like help get the, kind of being the person to like help get the print articles online and to help like make sure that we kind of have a plan for that. And making sure that they kind of that we don't wait 2 weeks to post our cover story. And like make sure it goes online when it needs to go online. And so it's just, a lot, and it was a lot of legacy journalism that was struggling to keep up and kind of wanting to, almost being kind of petulant about it in a way where they didn't want to have to compete with listicles or think pieces, things like that. They wanted to kind of maintain the same face that they've had for, at that point, almost 50 years. And so it was a fascinating time. I think, there was still, for artists within the music industry, of course, like the cover of the Rolling Stone hasn't really changed. Like that desire to be on the cover of Rolling Stone hasn't changed, but that idea of like being highly competitive in terms of traffic and like where we can bring new audiences in was sort of irrelevant to the like larger body behind the magazine. But that was shifting as I started, and I think that was like, again, because of this team that there was a new editorial director brought on for digital, and it was Karen Gans from New York Times, who now works at New York Times, and she was a huge part of that and was making sure that we were getting sort of a larger digital footprint. Presence. So that was definitely, I would say it took like a few years to really get that like totally there, but it was definitely in progress while I was there.
Okay, interesting because I mean obviously it's just noticing the shift in different editorial changes, whether it's music websites that maybe lean less on uniquely created features to focus on more news pieces that'll hit KPIs, or there'll just be press releases that have kind of been regenerated with a little bit of a unique output versus the newer outlets, or the more maybe tastemaker outlets that are sort of lining up now with the legacy titles. It's just like, okay, well, we see a point in the market now where people are coming back to really wanting those meaty, in-depth artist features. Let's make that our platform and really like sort of pour into that. For me anyway, like I'm the same as you. Like I love talking to musicians. I love sort of structuring a really meaty story around them. Like that's my favorite part of the job. So I'm loving seeing that there's such a passion for that. That's almost, I don't really think it ever went anywhere, but it definitely feels like at the moment there's a bit of a resurgence for people who want to spend time with a feature now,
Yeah,
instead of just like scrolling through like a news feed on their way home from work or whatever. Like they actually want to engage that side of their brain a bit more and have those feelings that we would have had when we were, reading through magazines, finding out
mhm,
about artists for the first time who we would never have access to as music fans, you know?
for sure. Yeah, I think especially younger fans want that,
Yeah,
and want to see their artists be treated with respect and sort of taken seriously. And that's always been like a big part of what I've done there,
yeah,
and what was important to my beat and the way that I cultivated my own writing and brand there was
mm,
really focusing on sort of teen pop acts and new and emerging acts, and trying to be as early as possible and getting a story on them, and also kind of cultivating a relationship with those artists.
yeah. Well, that was one thing I was actually going to ask you about is this idea of applying well, keeping an authentic voice like front and center, but also it feels like, as writers, as music writers in particular, we're in a unique position where we can bring our like fandom to the role in the way that we want to, whether that's,
Yeah.
we want to treat the artists that we love with respect when we're in a position to highlight their story, when we're in a position to maybe bring them to new audiences. And I feel like that's another great part of what we do. Yeah, like we get access to people who we're such fans of or who we've discovered and we can see the potential in, but also like as music writers, we have a really special gateway to hopefully start instilling that fandom in other people as well, which not many other people get to do as a job.
Yeah, I think like being able to bring what you love into what you're writing about and what you're covering is really important, but also still making sure that you have a critical eye on it is always
Yeah,
going to be the goal of anything that I'm working on and wanting to do.
totally, totally. Now, I know that I mean you alluded to it before, like you're traveling all the time, you're working on a lot of you could be working on a lot of things at any one point. Um, we speak a lot with our mentees and our emerging writers about different work processes. Obviously, everyone's going to work differently. Some people can work to pressure really nicely, others struggle a little bit. I know that I certainly go through waves of both. Um, but for you, like, especially when we're thinking about making sure that we have the inner checklist of things that we want to achieve in any feature or any project, like marked off in our
Mm.
heads. Um, how do you deal with a tough workload? Like, how do you deal with getting out of your own way when it comes to producing a piece that you're happy with? Like, do you have any sort of tips that you lean on for yourself to sort of get yourself over the line?
I do not get out of my own way. I'm often
Okay, me too.
the
Okay,
only one
cool.
in my way.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's trying as hard as possible to put myself on a schedule and set sort of like mini goals and expectations, but also being like patient with myself.
Mm,
I think like it's that's kind of important. And I think sometimes I would send myself into like panics for being really hard on myself about something, and then was not proud of what I was putting out. But then if I were kind of like a little bit like, okay, like this isn't coming out today and I need to be okay with that. Tomorrow's a new day. Like, it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
kind of being easier on myself and be like, it's fine. Like this happens. Like some people just like don't have it in them today. I think that is important. And yeah, I mean, I don't really know. I'm not really good at keeping myself sort of in check all the time.
that's
But I
real
think
because I don't think any of us are a lot of the time.
yeah, I think I try my best. I think I try to stay on a little bit of a schedule. I think I try to say
Mm,
no to things, in terms of both like taking on more work than I can take on. Saying no, I've said no to stories if I knew that, it just wasn't gonna be feasible. And um I think like also being realistic about, my own schedule outside of work and what I can do to add
yeah,
on top of that. I think um just trying to be mindful of how I say no to things is probably
Yeah.
the best that the thing that I've gotten better at as I've gotten older and have done more is like, I think the times when I haven't pushed myself to do like a million things at once and haven't pushed myself to be in a million places at once, on top of, you know, going to LA for a week and then having to turn around something you know, a week later, and like, you know, it's just kind of, it's been sort of just like me saying no.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a power in saying no, but also I feel like specifically as writers who may have gone into it at a younger age, and it was our first major career pathway or our only major career pathway, you know, it's kind of instilled in us that you have to be everywhere at once or you have to be taking on absolutely everything. And it's like, that's how 10 years goes by. And you're like, why am I so burnt out all the time? Like,
Yeah.
no
I mean,
idea.
I think I just convinced myself for many years that being burnt out is just the norm of it. And
Same.
that's like the sign of good work when it's not.
Yeah.
And like,
Oh,
um,
100%.
yeah. And I think, you know, especially in college, I started writing for money and professionally like when I was 20. And so I was still in college then. And
Mhm.
um, you know, I was just like covering concerts like 3 nights a week, and then I'd have class, and you know, I'd be at a concert like 11 p.m. I lived in like South Brooklyn, which is very far from where concerts are, and so it was like,
Mhm.
you know, I'd have like a 40-minute to an hour commute at night where you don't know when the trains are coming, and then
Yeah.
get home at like 12, and then I'd be up until 2 or 3 writing, well, 12 if I was lucky, depending on where I was coming from, be up really late, sometimes distracting myself, sometimes having to do homework. Then I would have to get up at like 6 in the morning to make it to class at 8 a.m. And yeah, it's just like,
Yeah. It's
and I just
rough.
convinced myself that that was normal. And then I would go ahead and do it again. And then I was just kind of like living off of like Red
Mm.
Bull and,
My
you
God.
know, like dollar pizza slices. And so it's just kind of, yeah, I was like, this is so exciting. And it was exciting. I loved doing it. Like it was fun. I got to see like so many great artists and do a bunch of reviews
Totally.
and get tons of bylines. And, you know, that was just like really cool. But at the same time, it was also like I was so tired all the time. And it was just like, there was a period of even like a couple years, my first like year at Rolling Stone, like I convinced myself that I could only write in the middle of the night because I was so used to just doing that. And
I was the
it's
same.
like, yeah, I was just like,
Yeah.
this is the only way I can be creative is like if I'm writing at like, you know, 2 in the morning, and I was just tired all the time. It was just like it was a bad way to live. And then after a while I was like, oh, I'm burnt out and I'm now saying no to the wrong things, which is, you know, having a
Yeah.
life outside of work, and saying no to sleeping and saying no to all of that. So
Yeah.
I think that
It's funny how we can get ourselves into a state where we romanticize that lifestyle so much, and it's just like,
yeah,
no, man, like we shouldn't be this strung out over something that
yeah,
we love, because then it's like you run the risk of it turning into something where the love isn't there as much anymore. And like you might enjoy
yeah,
it, but it's like
yeah,
imagine what I could be doing. Like if I'm doing this at 60% of my capability, imagine what I could be doing if I had a decent night's sleep.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like I could be kicking it. Um,
I know.
it's wild. I guess as we sort of get to the end of our time together today, I wanted to ask about just a couple of different case studies because, you know, with the lab here, it's one of the things that I've been the most impressed by, and you know, the most proud of is seeing our writers, you know, be put into situations, whether it's like festival coverage or, you know, they've been given tasks to develop um, their own independent sort of features, and seeing those features land with national publications out here has been incredible because again it's introducing new writers to readerships and audiences, but also it's developing potential career pathways. So we're seeing some of our writers who've gone on to start again doing freelance writing for some of these outlets, which is so cool. um Thinking about where you are now, I've been reading some of your profile pieces, and you are like absolutely everywhere. Like I feel like in terms of pop, particularly in looking at the intersection of like pop culture, music, and film at the moment, there is so much happening right now. So you must be just absolutely hectic. Um, can you tell us a bit about a profile piece or a feature that you've completed at the moment that has, I guess, like the whole process from, receiving that pitch, developing the pitch to now having it out there and running. Can you tell us a bit about like a recent project that you can now look at and be like, okay, that's out there now. Like, what's the next thing?
I recently did a piece on the Barbie soundtrack for Rolling
Yep.
Stone, and so that was really fun. That was a piece that kind of, I've been excited for this movie and all that. I had an editor who had been kind of talking with the publicist, and every story kind of comes about different ways. And I'm also at the kind of privilege of being at a place long enough where all my editors know my taste very well and
Yep.
know the things that I'm interested in and know what I
Mm-hmm.
like. And I kind of it's a mix of there are things that I'm pitching, but there are also things that my editors are like, okay, like Brittany will like this because that she likes the artist involved or she likes the
Yeah.
genre, or like even if
It's
they
a
don't know that I
vibe.
necessarily like it, like they're like, this seems like a Brittany thing. So this was a very neat kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
an editor had been sort of negotiating for this exclusive to do a reported piece on the Barbie soundtrack. And yeah, it was kind of a whirlwind of getting it together because I did like 6 interviews for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to do them all in like 10 days before I left for vacation because it was just
Oh
kind of
God.
coming together I had to do them all and finish the piece before I went on vacation because it was just kind of
Mm-hmm.
like the timing of it just sort of like they worked it out then. I had to go on vacation and like we had to close the issue. So yeah, it was kind of a sort of scheduling. It was Mark Ronson. It was who executive produced the soundtrack. We got Charlie XCX and Pink Pantheress. We got Margot Robbie for it, which was great, and then we got Kevin Weaver, who is the president of Atlantic, and Brandon Davis, who's the A&R in the album. So there's a lot of different voices kind of contributing to this
Yeah.
piece to talk about how this album came together, how they kind of built the sound out for the film, and how important the music was to the film. And so yeah, so it's just a lot of fun to kind of talk with them and get all their perspectives on it. I think it's like a very kind of interesting, like it was a unique a kind of approach they had to making the soundtrack than most soundtracks are made in terms of
Yeah.
kind of getting to like show this film in this way kind of early and having a lot of artists who were very readily interested in doing anything they could with this soundtrack and with this film that was so highly anticipated before anyone knew what it was about.
Totally.
And yeah, it was a quick turnaround and a fun one.
Yeah.
So
For
yeah,
some
so it was
for something that has such again, like as we're talking about cultural cachets, like that this whole project in particular is going to be a moment when it finally comes out. Like we've been seeing just how the press cycles for Barbie have been. I mean, it has been global. I mean, we had press conferences happening in Australia, like decking out in Sydney, India. Like we've had all of these activations been popping up. Obviously,
yeah.
we've had like a lot of the cast and Greta that have come over here for it. Um, when you're dealing with a feature, and this might be the thing that we'll end on, when you're dealing with a feature that might be not in the traditional format, i.e., you one-on-one with one interview subject. When it's a project like this, when you're talking to producers, you're talking to music producers and film producers, label people and artists, and you're trying to make room for all of their voices while also still determining a narrative that keeps your voice in check. Like how have you found that you've been able to maneuver that within a word
Yeah,
count frame as well?
I think it's always about finding the anchor of the story. I think in this
Mm-hmm.
case, Mark Ronson was, I knew he was going to be the anchor of the story because he executive produced the soundtrack and was the most responsible for getting everything together. And obviously, like Charlie and Pink Pantheress, they have very individual stories, right? Just about their songs. They don't know how the
Sure.
rest of the soundtrack came together. Um, Kevin and Brandon like were in and out, of course, like working with Mark, but Mark's the one who was like individually showing the movie to these artists and inviting them into the story and kind of had the most kind of direct relationship with it. So
Yeah.
I built a lot of it around him, and knowing that his quotes would be sort of building out the narrative arc of the story. And surprisingly, also, you never know how much sort of the film producers and the actors in it will have. And Margot had a lot to say about the soundtrack and how it was coming together and how it was made. And so that was kind of a bonus anchor of the story, was that she was able to fill in some more kind of gaps from the perspective of someone who helped get the movie made in the first place, but also is the Barbie in the film and the star of it. And was able to kind of put her perspective on a lot of the taste that was informing it from her own conversations with Greta Gerwig and everyone. So kind of it was a nice kind of touch of having the back and forth of their two kind of narrative arcs, and then kind of peppering in the kind of the other quotes from like Kevin and Brandon and Charlie and Pink Panthers. And so
so good, so good. Highly recommend people check that one out. I had a lot of fun diving in with that, because I feel like I'm the sort of person where if it's like a massive film, or like, again, if I can tell it's going to be a massive cultural moment, it's like my brain will automatically shut off with engaging with it, because I'm like, it's too much, it's too much, it's too much. But when I saw that this piece came out, I don't know, just like ticked like that weird nerd box in my head where I'm like, okay, this is like something a little bit different to dive into. And I love Mark Ronson as well. Like he's such a sweetheart and has just such a massive music brain. Like I just love talking. Like the few times I've been able to talk to him, it's just like I learned so much just by osmosis almost. Because again, he is such a massive music fan as well. And it's like when you see people like him really getting to flex and apply that love for music in such a unique way, if you're lucky enough to be in a position to write about that and to sort of pick those people's brains about that, it's sort of, I don't know, for me anyway, it validates what we do. It reminds me like, oh, okay, this is why I write about music. This is why I love talking to people like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know I've taken up a lot of your time already today, but it's going to be super exciting, guys, because Brittany is going to be coming out to Australia for the first time. I don't know if I can even technically say that, but we're saying it because it's our close family anyway. Here on the call, Brittany's going to be coming out to hang out in Big Sound, at Big Sound with us. First time coming out to Australia, I believe.
Yeah, it is.
Crazy. And we're bringing you to Fortitude Valley for the first time. I can only apologize and warn you that it's going to be a hectic 3 days, but it's okay because we're going to walk you through it. We've got you. So for any of us who are going to be in Brisbane, I know that there are some Brisbane-based riders, but for any of our past participants who might be heading back to Brisbane this September, Brittany's going to be there. We're going to be doing some really cool shit and just making her feel welcome, starting to get her in front of some incredible Australian artists. And at Big Sound as well, I believe there's going to be a whole crop of artists from the UK and New Zealand who are coming over too. So it's going to be an exciting time just to, again, be back in venues and to be, getting around some fresh names, which is going to be really cool. So, Brittany, thank you so much for hanging out and just telling us a bit more about yourself and your career. This is just the beginning.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing with me. I can't wait to meet you and everyone in person.